My name's John McAnulty. I'm a member of the Belfast anti-war group, and I'm a former Northern Chair of the Irish National Teachers Organisation. And the reason I've got that banner up is that we hope to attract some Belfast trade unions to the meeting. But normally when you try and get trade unions involved in politics, there's a sort of shuffling sound and they all disappear, and that seems to be the case here. The format is that Mick is going to say a few words. I'll say something very short, and then there's a general discussion. Okay, Mick O'Reilly is speaking on behalf of the as a member of the Dublin Trades Council. He is the former regional secretary of Unite. He's the author of a book called From Lucifer to Lazarus by Lilliput Press, which lists his experience as the only major union figure ever to be sacked from his job and win his place back again. Some feat. He was also, although he hasn't mentioned that, he's also the only member of the Irish trade union movement I know about who spoke out against partnership, and in a way his troubles as regional secretary came from that opposition and for aiding people who were it was train drivers who were trying to oppose this off their own bat. And the reason for inviting Mick is that he spoke at the Dublin Trades Council May Day demonstration, and sort of asked, I'm not really a Putinist, but what's wrong with peace? Why shouldn't we stop the war? So I don't think it made him terribly popular. So I'll let Mick be a
Okay. Well, first of all, thanks for the invitation. I have to say, it's not a subject that I have kind of spent a lifetime studying war and peace or anything like that. I've spent my life really concerned about wages and conditions and trying to look after people. But it's something that I have a deep concern about. And I approach it, I suppose, maybe the way most Irish people approach it, as somebody who lives in a very small country beside a very big one. And I think our political outlook in Ireland is shaped by that geography and the way of looking at things. And that's why I want to start off by saying that I think it's important for a small country always to try and uphold the rule of law, insofar as there is any law governing nations, respect for self-determination, and the idea that if you have to change things, you have to do it by negotiation. I have a private personal view, and it's not the view of the Dublin Trades Council, that in a way Vladimir Putin was lured into this thing, and it might have been better had he not done what he done. Now, putting the thing into context and saying that you first start with a condemnation of Russia in relation to the way it's behaved and broken international context and all the rest of it, I think you also have to see the wider context of the war. And you have to try, if you're in negotiations with anybody, to try and wear their shoes, to try to see it from their perspective if you want to have any kind of peace or have any kind of understanding. And sadly, this is the worst war from the perspective of coverage that I have experienced. I remember in Dublin, probably in the mid-60s, walking with 13 people opposing the war in Vietnam. By the end of our campaign, we had about 40,000 people on the streets. And there was a huge interest in the anti-war movement. I wish I could believe that we might be able to do something like that over this war. And maybe we will, because wars are unpredictable in the way they impact on people. And there's no free war. There's a cost to everything. A terrible cost if you're in the Ukraine or you're a Russian. But there's also a cost throughout the rest of Europe and the rest of the world. If you want to look at it from a Russian perspective, you have to see that if you're a Russian, and I mean this, whether you're the Tsar or whether you're the General Secretary of the CPSU or whoever you were, you look at Europe and it's a place where people come into your country and make war with you. Russia in the last 200 years have been, I think, attacked 6 times by Napoleon. For these purposes, I'd say the West, but the Japanese were, attacked them as well in 1905 and all the rest of it. So the Russians have a deep insecurity, and it's based on their experiences, not based on the fact that they have a warped outlook. If somebody had attacked Ireland 6 times in the last 200 years, we'd have a certain attitude to people. So that's the way the Russians look at these things. Now, on the question of the Ukraine, a lot has been made of this. Putin wrote a long article in which he disputed the fact, to some degree, that there was a place called the Ukraine. And I know that British commentators have jumped on it and said, well, that's like the way the British used to think of the Irish, that they had no right to independence. Now, that's not what he said in the article. He did actually say that maybe it shouldn't have been done, but he said, but I accept the borders, and I accept that. But nevertheless, he said these remarks, and a lot's been made of them. Now, there was a coup, I'll call it a coup, in the Ukraine in 2014. There were 14,000 people killed. The government that's there now was elected on the basis of the Minsk Accord and talks and doing something about Russian speakers and all the rest, all the things that we would say would make up some kind of a peace thing. And these people were supposed to stay in the state of the Ukraine, but they were supposed to get autonomy on certain language issues and all the rest. So that's as I understand it. I'm no expert in these things, but that's as I understand it. Now they are openly saying, well, we only done that to buy time, because the Americans trained the Ukrainian army, and they armed them to the teeth, and there's no, they have revived the memory of fascists. They have revered them. They have had public holidays in their name. They have discriminated against the Russian language, and so on and so forth. Now, who is investigating this? Is it illegal for a journalist to examine the public holidays in the Ukraine? Are people given public holidays for former fascists? Is that true? I'm saying it is true. But no journalist is telling me this. You can find it in the alternative media. But why are people not being informed of this? I mean, I feel that this war is so bad that I said to somebody the other day, if you're listening to the radio, make sure they're not playing Tchaikovsky, because you get yourself into terrible trouble. You might get sacked even. This is shocking what's going on and what we have for a fortress state. I don't think there's any journalism here at all. Certainly nobody's investigating anything. And the old adage of the journalist, what people tell you is propaganda. What you have to do is find out what they don't want you to know. Who is telling us what they don't want us to know? Where is this kind of thing happening? It's not happening at all. So the aim of these people was to reverse the thing, and they put the aim of joining NATO into the Constitution. Right? I think that's shocking if you're a Russian. Now just reverse this for a minute. The Cuban Missile Crisis. The Cuban Missile Crisis. The Americans wouldn't have it. They just said they'd go to war And they done a deal with the Russians. Yeah, they took their vote. But the point is, on the Monroe Doctrine, which was invented by the Americans, according to national interest, if people around you threaten your security, you have a right to interfere with them. That's, the Americans regard that as a valid international law, and they behave accordingly all over the Americas. And if you ask anybody in Latin America, they'll tell you fairly quickly how they enforce that. But that doesn't apply to the Russians. They've got no rights in this. And I think Putin may be wrong about a lot of things, but he's not wrong about the question of the insecurity that the Russians feel. And I don't think he's acting in a way that's out of kilter with how a lot of the Russians think about this, right? And I mean, they know who these people were in the Ukraine. They know who holidays are being called after, and all of this, right? So that's the situation there. The other thing is, I think, however difficult it is, we have to try and get some of this information across to people. We have to talk about it. We have to try and involve the trade union movement in it above all else. And I noticed that the TUC has come out in favour and have not criticised the extra military expenditure that the Tories have looked for over this war, right? And what's been said in Europe is quite clear that they're moving back towards austerity in Europe. They're talking about the fiscal rules being applied more rigidly because we're out of COVID. But they're saying this can't apply to armaments. They're still committed to arming Ukraine to the teeth. Now, this is just a casual observation. I'm not saying it's true. The Russians were supplying the Germans with most of their fuel and gas and all the rest of it. They had built up the connections to do it. The two biggest states in Europe are Germany and Russia. If you have that kind of interdependence built up between people, peace will grow between them. Common ways of looking at the world will grow between them. All sorts of things will grow between them. And that is a fact that influences, threatens and undermines American hegemony in Europe. And they blew up this line and they're supplying frack gas in to Germany now. And it's costing the Germans a lot more. But it hasn't worked in terms of the sanctions against the Russians. It has not worked because the Chinese have stepped in and the Indian governments have stepped in and some other governments stepped in and they're buying the fuel. And the Europeans were told that this was going to crack open Russia. It hasn't done so, and I think there's a bit of a panic in Europe as to what they're going to do. I'll just say a word or two about the Republic because it's in a slightly different position to Northern Ireland, obviously. We're supposed to have a policy of Irish neutrality. In effect, since the Second World War, governments have been hollowing that out. Internally, we've joined NATO, we associate with NATO, but we've got certain things that we still are committed to neutrality. Neutrality is not a big thing with the political parties. Most of them don't care about it. They'd willingly sign up to NATO. A lot of the politicians would. But amongst the people, it's still a big issue. They hold on to it, they believe in it, and they think we should practice it. And the president, as he often goes off the record, said that we were being blindly led into NATO and that people should wake up and think about where we were going. Now the polls show that 82% of the people support that viewpoint, right? And that, pardon my language, has frightened the bejesus out of the political parties. They are frightened of their life of it because they've come out ultra strong and said, no, we're not having nothing to do with NATO, we're not joining it. Now whether they're serious or not is another question, but the fact is they're frightened over the response And Sinn Féin have come out, it was their policy, but they've come out and said it and stood by it, and I think it's a good development that they will insist that there be a referendum called if they get into power, and that neutrality be enshrined in the Constitution. That would be a wholly good thing, a wholly good thing. So that's kind of where we are on that. I think that's sort of all I want to say really on the basis of just kind of opening up a discussion. But I think we do have to reach out to the rest of the trade union movement, to the Stop the War Coalition. I'll just say one thing about the Stop the War Coalition in Britain. In their marches, and they've had a few marches, which were reasonably well attended. Trade union people attended them, community groups and all the rest. But they're the first marches that I can remember where there was not one Labour MP at them. Not one Labour MP at them. I say that again. That's astonishing. In the height of the Cold War, there was always, I don't know, 6, 7, 8, 10, maybe 20 Labour MPs who would stick it up to the leadership. Even during the Blair years, there'll be always a small number of MPs who would stand out there. That is gone. They are frightened of their lives of this new regime inside the Labour Party, and it's very depressing to think about it. But I have to try and find some way around it. I don't know whether the unions can provide any cover to give people who perhaps want to speak out or feel, they should say something about it. The other thing I think that we have to say, we have to make space for peace. The Africans went there and they said, they didn't even say they wanted peace or a ceasefire. They said they wanted the start of de-escalation. Frankly, I don't mind what they said. The first draft of any peace process where there's a war going on, where people hate one another, and the Ukrainians and the Russians hate one another, that's clear enough. Enough happened between them for each side to feel like that quite genuinely. But the reality is, the first draft of any proposal to stop a war is always rejected. But you have to have a first draft to start the discussion. Remember the situation here in Ireland. Suppose Micheál Martin said, there cannot be any peace negotiations until the Russians withdraw, do everything. Suppose we just said that up here. There cannot be any peace negotiations until the British get out of Ireland or until the IRA, stand ahead and say they're sorry for everything. Where would we be now? We wouldn't have gone anywhere. Getting peace is a process of trying. I accept that, as General Giap used to say, you can only get at the negotiating table what you can win on the battlefield. I accept that is kind of the background of any kind of war, and people want to get themselves into the strongest position they can before the negotiation. That's their position. But the international community should be trying to bring about peace, and they have the clout to do it. Donald Trump, who I'm no admirer of, was able to say, if I'm elected, I'll end that war in a day. Right? Well, I don't know whether he'd do it in a day or not, but the fact is, if America wanted to end that war, it could. It could sue for peace. And I'm not talking about cutting and run on the Ukraine, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about finding an accommodation, right, that accepts their sovereignty and their frontiers, that does something about the Russian speakers and the need for autonomy, and that says they're not going to join NATO. Because that's the one thing that the Russians are absolute about. They are not going to join NATO, because if the nuclear weapons are that much nearer to them, in 5 minutes they can be destroyed. Maybe they can't retaliate. But there are good reasons, if you're thinking of these things militarily, why they should be suspicious about things. So I also think that this war has created terrible divisions on the left, right? And we have to try and overcome them as well by talking to people who, are just fanatically pro-Russian or fanatically pro-Ukrainian. I don't think that's the answer to any of these things. Incidentally, although Putin, talks about Ukraine being really the same as Russia and all the rest of it. It's very interesting that it was Lenin who actually thought up the idea of Ukrainian kind of sovereignty and independence and all of that sort of stuff. So you might say the Americans are now are now supporting the formulations of Lenin in the Fourth World War. But anyway, I'm digressing. I shouldn't say things like that. But anyway, that's the kind of things I think we should be doing. I think we should be working in the trade union movement, looking at model resolutions, having discussions on it, and trying to mobilise public opinion, because we're not going to solve, in the South anyway, we're not going to solve the housing crisis. We're not going to solve the cost of living crisis. We're not going to solve what's happening on energy and all the other things unless we do something about this war. And we have to look for peace. And I don't think we should be hounded away from the idea of looking for peace, or slandered for being puppets of Putin or anybody else. We have to make space for this. It's going to be difficult to start off. We'll be called all kinds of names and all the rest of it. But so be it. So be it. We have to do it. If we don't do it, who's going to do it? So that's all I have to say.